Yeah. So I just wanted to clarify a couple things because the topic here is a bit confusing with like the 2% figure versus the 0.00 whatever percent figure and stuff like that. And it mostly just comes down to terminological differences and not like substance differences. So the 2% figure comes from Anne Foster Sterling's book, Sexing the Body, I believe. Okay. And that estimate includes a lot of different things that I don't think get classified as DSD, at least not anymore. Okay. But at the time it was different. And just in general, the terminology around intersex conditions has been fraught. So like before 2006 or so, there was no real it's not that there wasn't a consensus, but like terminology was a little bit non-standard, and it was kind of all over the place. And in 2006, they standardized the terminology completely, which had it had benefits in that it standardized the terminology, but it had like pretty severe drawbacks in that it firmly classified intersex variation as a disorder. So like intersex is not a term that is used medically anymore. It's mostly used by like intersex studies theorists, or at the very least, there's like a split between people who use intersex and people who use DSD. And the reason that it's controversial is because DSD stands for disorders of sexual development, which like inherently is kind of stigmatizing, right? It's saying the way that your body is disordered, that you're not supposed to be that way, that that we should take measures to like quote unquote fix you, right? Yeah. And the reason that that's fraud is because of sex normalization surgeries at early ages, especially in infancy. So you end up in a situation where people, how do I explain this? So when people point to like the really small statistics, they're usually talking about like people who are completely ambiguous in terms of their sex. Yeah. And that it's very true. It's true that this is a very, very small percentage of people. They used to be called true hermaphrodites. I don't know what the current term is actually, but the point is that it is actually very, very small. But I think that pointing only to them and saying like, oh, it's so, these people are so small. For one, they still exist, right? And I think that that's the argument you were making, that regardless of whether or not you want to say, there are very, 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 very small percent of the population, they still exist and they still invalidate the binary, right? If you have a string of 1 million ones and zeros, but then you have a 2 in the middle, it's not a binary sequence, right? But even pushing back on that more, the thing is that the reason that everybody else gets assigned a sex is not a scientific reason, really. It's a social one. It's part of the guidelines. Like it's not that there's some truth we're uncovering when we look at people with intersex variations, and we can be like, oh, Klinefelters, they're all male because like these are the exact factors. No, it's about it's completely about what they think you're quote unquote closest to. And what you're closest to is, I hope I don't have to say, it's a very subjective judgment. And it's often up to the clinician. And their judgment is going to be based on how easily they think your genitals can be shaped to fit within a specific sex binary. And that's, I think, the crux of the issue here, is that even if you want to say that intersex people are, like true intersex people are very, very small, enough people have such variations that people still feel the need to quote unquote correct their bodies to in the early age for purely cosmetic reasons, not for like medical reasons, because there are medical reasons to do it, especially like CAH, like people can have a hormone problems that can be fatal. So, surgeries for that reason, that's totally fine. But genital surgeries tend to be for cosmetic reasons alone. And before the year 2000, about 1 in every 1,000 live births had ended up with genital surgery for quote unquote corrective or sexual corrective reasons. I can get that study if you give me a second.
And is this because their genitals were ambiguous? Is that what you mean by corrective sex surgery?
Yeah. So it's not just that they were that's what I'm saying is like they were ambiguous enough for the surgeon to judge that they should have corrective surgery. And I think that goes to show that sex categories are not like these innate things that we like to think of them as. Because like when we say sex is assigned, we really do mean sex is assigned. Like it's actually the case that if you will deviate enough, they will force your body to conform to a specific standard. I need to scroll through Zotero because I have so many studies here.
Yeah.
While I'm doing that, you can talk. Like, does everything I'm saying like line up with what you've heard and like that kind of stuff?
Yeah, more or less. I wasn't exactly sure why the number went from 2% down to like the really low one, but I kind of get it now. I guess isn't it like the social aspect of how you sex someone? I guess that also changes over time, right? Because I think with CAH, it used to be the case that if you had like ovaries, that would mean they'd always call you a woman. But now it's like more recently that if they have ovaries but also penises, then it seems to be the case that they tend to get assigned male because that's what they prefer usually. So, yeah.
And then even before that, like sex or like finding out true sex used to not really be a medical thing. It used to be something that courts decided, and especially like small common law courts. So you can actually get a lot of interesting insight into like beliefs about sex and gender by looking at these old cases. And I read an interesting study about that once that looked over some case law about that. So right, I have the study here. I'm going to send it to you just in DMs. And yeah, it's actually even higher than I thought. It's 1 to 2 of every 1,000 live births. So let's ignore just for a second like whether or not these people are truly ambiguous or whether or not like the medical establishment has decided them to be male or female. It still remains the case that like 0.1 to 0.2% of the population is ambiguous enough that it makes people uncomfortable and like surgeons feel the need to quote unquote correct them. And to be clear, like I think that surgeries like this are barbarous. I think that they should be outlawed, and there have been a lot of pushes to do that by intersex activists, but that's like a whole other can of worms. The point is just that it shows a kind of variation here that is, I think, masked by the 0.00025% figure or whatever. Because I know where that comes from. It comes from a study that's responding to Ann Foster Sterling, and they count out a bunch of things that have obvious sex variations just on the basis that they aren't totally ambiguous. And I think that misses the point, right? That misses the point of what people are getting at when they bring up intersex people. They're getting at the fact that there are variations here, and when we see variations, we are forcing them to fit into a category it's not the case that they already fit into the category. We're expanding the category and sometimes changing that person's actual physiology such that they conform to what we think they quote unquote should be. Yeah, that's all I really wanted to say. Just because I saw people in the chat getting confused, and you know, this is something I spent like a whole semester like researching and writing about. So I just figured it was like interesting enough that I should probably come on and talk about it.
What was this? Was this for a course or what? Like
it was an independent study.
Oh,
so
okay.
I was writing a paper. Like specifically what I was writing about was about the terminology change. So like I wanted to see if changing the terminology also changed the way that researchers discussed the issue.
Okay.
And in particular, I was looking at for indications of whether or not researchers who used DSD terminology, meaning disorders of sexual development, whether or not they were more likely to advocate for a binary view of sex, whether or not they were advocating for early infant surgeries and that kind of stuff, right? Also, just like in general, the literature on this is kind of disgusting. Like people, like researchers will just like publish these infants like genitalia into their papers, and sometimes these people are from like non-industrialized countries, so like it's not always clear like their level of consent, at least not to me. Like I don't know that they can fully grasp like what's being done, because I understand that there are medical reasons to publish photos, but these photos are like grotesque, and like I don't know, that was just my impression from reading everything.
Okay. So you said intersex people are campaigning against corrective surgery, right?
Yeah, some intersex people. So like to be clear, no, like intersex people are not a monolith. I don't want to give the impression that that they are, and opinions on it definitely do vary from person to person. In particular, I believe that there are some, so you can break down intersex conditions, and certain people from certain intersex conditions are more likely to be happy with surgery than otherwise. But it's not always clear to me what the impetus for that is. So like one way we can think about it is like some intersex conditions are not always that visible phenotypically, right? And so you might end up in a situation where people who are part of that group want to distance themselves from other intersex people because of like stigma around it, right? Like when we have, so I remember one survey that I read where the question was phrased like, do you think that these forthcoming laws should make exceptions for your intersex condition specifically? Or your DSD specifically, and so in some groups, people like said yes, and to me it seems like that could be explained like they are happy with their surgeries, or it could be explained by the idea that how do I say this, that they want to like, they don't want to be seen as like this different thing, right? They want to be seen as just normal, right? And that's like a pretty understandable feeling, right? That you want to feel like you're normal, that you don't want to feel like your differences are so significant that that you need special protections or whatever. Like that's not like an unreasonable or uncommon opinion. As for the people who are like intersex activists, though, it's almost always in opposition to corrective quote unquote surgeries. I've seen very few, if any, like big advocates for intersex surgery. So like the most motivated people oppose it. And if you talk to just your average everyday intersex person or a person with like an intersex variation, the opinions get a lot more mixed. That's been my impression.
Yeah, it would be hard to measure it with activism, I guess, because if you had the corrective surgery and you liked it, like, why would you bother being an activist? Like, you're not doing it for like people are
exactly
selfish.
Right.
Yeah,
yeah. And yeah, it's like a survivorship bias kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like, you know, if you didn't have any reason to complain, and you know, and also it's just like people tend to go along with what they with whatever situation they're in, right? As long as it's not totally intolerable. So if all you've ever known is, you know, I had surgery when I was at a young age, you know, who cares, right? You lived your life up to that point with that knowledge. So, well, actually, that's a whole other can of worms, because it used to be standard practice not to tell people that they had surgeries on them. Like, it used to be the case that doctors and parents would keep it secret because they didn't want to distress the child, and that led to all kinds of problems. Thankfully, that's not the case anymore. That was one of the good things about the 2006 consensus, is that it made it a faux pas, or like it recommends explicitly against hiding things and explicitly for open communication. But sorry, that was a tangent. But the point is that like if you grow up with something, you're more accustomed to it, and you're likely to just see it as fine, right? Like male circumcision, for example, in the United States is widespread, and I feel like most men in the United States don't really think twice about it. Mm-hmm. Like you see very few people who are like really salty about getting circumcised, even though like if you think about it, it is like it's pretty gross, right? It's pretty it kind of flies in the face of what we think of as just conduct for like medical professionals and for parents, right? But that would be my explanation for why that there's so much diversity, and why the most active people like are the ones who oppose it, as opposed to the ones who like support it.
Yeah, because I feel like it would just make sense if you're intersex to just make the decision when you're older, right? Because you're probably going to grow up, but yeah, you might grow up thinking like, fuck, I'd rather just look like all the other people genitalia-wise. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and like that's the thing, is that these surgeries can have complications for later sexual pleasure, for like bleeding, that kind of stuff. Like there's a lot of risk with the surgery that an infant cannot consent to, in my mind. It's also, I also think it's an interesting issue to talk about with conservatives, because I've never, ever seen a conservative come out against this kind of thing, like ever. Mm-hmm. Even though it's like, if you think about it, it is literally gender surgery on infants, mm-hmm. right? And I think it just, I think it like really, really highlights the fact that what conservatives care about is conformity to specific sex and gender norms, as opposed to like consent or whatever, because they're more than happy to look the other way with corrective surgeries on intersex people, because those corrective surgeries bring them in line with what we want the sex binary to be, or whatever.
Yeah, and I feel like with trans people, they're so happy to use words like mutilation and shit like that. But as soon as it comes to intersex or circumcision, which are both actually mutilation as well, they just don't they don't want to go there. Yeah, I get this kind of shit. Exactly. How valuable do you find intersex being kind of like invoked in trans conversations?
How valuable? I think it really depends. So on the one hand, I get the impression that a lot of people who invoke it have not really done any research on intersex people or intersex issues.
Mhm.
And that does feel a little concerning. To be clear, I'm not intersex, so like
Okay.
I can't like speak to their experience or anything, but I will say that there's a couple things. So when intersex people are invoked in trans conversations, it sometimes feels like they're just being used as like a chip, like an argument chip, not as a like not they're not being invoked with any understanding of the complexities of the issue. And that does rub me the wrong way a little bit, because I do think intersex issues are important and super interesting. And I think a lot of like people who are interested in gender stuff would do well to look into this stuff, because I don't think any of it contradicts like gender theory or trans people or anything like that. But it does feel weird to me when you only ever talk about intersex people in the context of trans issues, right? That said, there is a lot of reason to draw the parallel, because it shows the social construction of sex like pretty blatantly, because it shows how like we literally change people's bodies to fit in line with sex expectations. And one thing I haven't talked about is that one of the things that the guidelines specified is that every infant needs to have a gender assignment. And that is like one of the things that they highlight, is that you need to assign them a gender. You are not allowed to let them make up their mind on their own. And that has like a whole history of it has a whole history to it. Like, do you know like the David is it David the Reimer case?
Yeah, conservatives bring it up all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really funny, because that case, also just for the audience, basically a kid had in the when was it? I actually don't remember. Is it like this? It is okay. It is David Reimer. I was right.
He's born in the 60s, no?
Yeah, it was the 60s. Okay. Yeah, during the 60s, a kid had a botched circumcision because of an outdated method. I think it used electricity. Point is, he was horribly disfigured, and a prominent sexologist at the time named Dr. Money basically thought, hey, this is a perfect opportunity. I'm going to assign this person as female and raise them as female, and see what happens. And it ended up being a huge scandal, because for one, Dr. Money lied about a lot of the results as they were coming out, and like and David Reimer had like horrible mental health problems, eventually committing suicide, I believe. Or he overdosed, which are not necessarily mutually exclusive, right? And you presumably because he had intense gender dysphoria, right? And the reason that conservatives bring it up is like, oh, look at that, you can't your biology is your destiny, and there's no way to change anything or whatever, right? And I hope I don't have to say it, but that's stupid, right? Like, this is sample size 1, so it doesn't mean anything really for like anything scientific. And even then, it doesn't, even if we say that it's binding, it doesn't really contradict anything in trans discourse, right? It just shows that he wasn't trans or wouldn't have been trans. It's like, because trans people are not saying like you can just raise anybody any which way. Like, if anything, it seems like trans people, or the better position for a trans person would be to assign something ambiguous, or to let the kid make it up on their own terms, right? Like you don't want to assign. The whole point is not to assign these categories early on. It's to avoid or defer the assignment of these categories. But I digress. This didn't really have a huge impact on trans people, but it did have a huge impact on intersex people. And the reason is that researchers took from this study, which again was flawed and unethical, that you could just assign anybody to anything. And so intersex surgeries were justified on those grounds. So because here's another thing that conservatives won't mention is like Dr. Money was not really progressive. Like he was basically an essentialist, right? Like he thought that you needed to be in one category or the other, that there was no like variation between them. And so you end up with this scenario where his results say, oh, you can assign anyone to anything. And then clinicians are like, oh, well, gender identity is important. So let's just assign intersex people to whatever we think they are quote unquote closest to. And let's also not tell them because like they don't need to know. And then they won't question their gender identity. And then they can grow up all fine and dandy, right? Like, and it has had a huge impact, like to the point where, I mean, it's still, a lot of clinicians still do this. Like there aren't any explicit recommendations against it. Like that's the funny thing is that like you can read the 2006 consensus statement and the later consensus statement that updated it. And like they acknowledge in it that there like are huge concerns around early normalizing surgery, but they don't outright recommend against it. They kind of use like the weasel words of like, oh, make sure you consult with the parents and the clinician and like make sure there's open communication. It's like, because they don't want to step on the toes of people who think who of like surgeons especially who are still stuck with the idea that you need to assign people to one sex or the other, right? Shit, where was I going with this? I don't actually remember. Sorry, can you help me find my train of thought again? Because I
you were
remember
talking about Dr. Money and why we assign. He says that everyone needs a gender assignment. That was the idea.
Oh yeah.
That as an example, yeah.
Yeah, because we were that's what because I was talking about why. Yeah, but why did I bring up everybody needing a gender assignment? Sorry, I'm so sorry that I lose my train of thought.
Because I think you were trying to say that that's not the case. Like we should maybe be more ambiguous with kids until they can find out for themselves.
Yes. That's what I was getting at. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that made my.
I feel like with the intersex thing, the most interesting thing for me condition for me when it comes to the trans stuff is that CAH patients, because they have the gametes, right? They've got the egg gametes, but doctors will still decided to call them male because in part, like it makes sense because that's how they feel about themselves. They tend to feel that way about themselves. So it wouldn't make sense to like let the ovaries override the mind. And the way I kind of understood it, and I don't really make this argument very often because no one else has, and I don't trust myself to come up with it by myself. But this idea that that either your brain or your psychology, whichever way you want to use, is like a part of your sex. And you can have situations where the body can be going completely one way, but your mind or your psyche or whatever the fuck is going the other way. And then it's just up to us to decide which one takes the fucking torch, basically. And my argument with that would be that your psychology or your brain or whatever should come first, because if you put my brain in someone else's body, I'm still going to be me. I don't turn into them, even though every other cell in my body is theirs, right? Because body swap scenes in films kind of suggest the same thing. But I don't know, because the problem I have with making that argument is that I don't know, because I get, one is because I came up with it by myself and I think that feels weird. But also because doesn't it kind of suggest that being trans, if you believe in the brain sex thing, doesn't that mean that being trans is just another kind of intersex? Or is it different because the way that transness expresses itself is a lot more social, and that's why it can't just be an intersex? It's like, it's not just a sex thing. It's why it like overlaps a bit.
Yeah, I would need to think about that, because so I guess the question is like how dimorphic do we consider the brain to be, right? That we can consider it a sex organ. I think that's what it would come down to, for one, and also just because like my whole thing is that like sex and gender are like constructed categories. Like they don't need to be the way they are. So like I would probably just take an abolitionist approach to both, but I know that you don't take that line, so I don't think that would hold much weight for you.
I mean, I empathize with the abolitionist position insofar as that I think it should matter less and less. I just, when people say abolitionist, the problem I have with invoking that term is it basically makes people, and not you, other people, adopt like insane positions that don't make any sense. But because abolish just sounds like free for all, right? Which I don't think it should necessarily. Oh, yeah, I don't know. But
I mean, I like the idea of free for all, just because like I think that I don't know. I think that that's how you get to the point of abolition, is you keep you just keep letting things play out, and you keep letting people expand the category in their own unique ways, and eventually you get, at least the hope is that eventually you get to a point where people don't take the category so seriously.
Yeah, but then so the problem I have there is that like people going their own way. I can see that happening with like gender expression in like a social way. Like again, that's why I'm very, you know, I see as like, you know, I would call that like tomboys or femboys and all that. But I think applying that to like gender and sex as a concept is that then you get into this murky territory where people just kind of going for a free-for-all, but at the same time trying to advocate for healthcare rights for kids over what we consider an immutable characteristic. That's the thing, because I always seem with especially with right-wingers and especially with people who oppose trans healthcare for kids, the first thing I always go to is that like we do this because it's observably like real, like it's a real thing, it's observable, it's not going anywhere. You're not converting anyone, and that's why I think that like there's a bit of a clash there to me.
I mean, it would really, to me, it would really depend on what you mean by immutability. If this is any like conciliation, I think that here is one of the main reasons I'd like to separate gender dysphoria from transness, and also why I don't hate gender dysphoria as a category. Like I know that that's had huge discourse around it, but I think that gender dysphoria referring to a like that distress, I think that ultimately the reason that trans people deserve to have the healthcare is because of that distress. Like if you're not experiencing distress, like you could probably wait. That's my thought. And so if you just have gender dysphoria, like we don't know all the causes of gender dysphoria, but we know that like gender dysphoria is a thing that people experience. Like people have a huge amount of distress, and we know that transition can alleviate that. So, and when we're talking about children, we're not really talking about drastic things for the most part. Like I think the most drastic thing you can do as a minor is top surgery, and you almost never get that. Like you can have top surgery as like a 16-year-old in very, very rare cases of extreme distress, and you know that's justified on the basis of it being distressing, right? That's and also like another thing is that gender affirming surgeries for minors exist for cis people. And the example I always use is gynecomastia, I believe is how you pronounce it.
Mhm.
So like you can have like men can go through puberty and they can develop breasts. And if you're a cis person, you are allowed to get those breasts removed. Like it's not like they're not like cancerous or anything. They're not going to like kill you. It's purely a psychological thing. And like thinking about it, like it seems weird to me that like if a guy comes in, he's like, you know, I feel terrible because of my man boobs. I really want them removed, right? Like, I don't think most people would think that that's weird or that it's bad. And there are like thousands of surgeries for that every year. Like, hold on, I can actually get the statistics on this one.
Sorry, while you're doing that, I wanted to mention something you said earlier about the how drastic it is for kids. I think the problem is obviously is like the other side, and actually, honestly, a lot of progressive people as well. Like I think the position that trans youth should get blockers and hormones is actually, I don't even think it's I think it's disputed on the left as well, not just left and right. I think a lot of like progressives would still think that they hesitate about under 18s. But I think the reason that people hesitate on it is because they think what it's doing is putting people down the path when they might not have to be. And also because it seems to be that the side effects of puberty blockers are a bit worse than some people like to make them out to be potentially. I guess that's why the immutability thing is kind of important for that, because it's like the argument would have to be that you don't really get these things unless it's very like agreed upon in a medical sense that like this is not going to change. Like whatever's they're making them want this is like not going to go away, you know?
Okay. So that I guess there's a couple things I'd say to that. So I understand the argument about like quote unquote putting them down a path. The problem is that no matter what, you're putting them down a path. If you let them go through puberty without hormones, you are putting them down a path. Like there is no staying the course. And this makes it like disanalogous to other examples. I think so. Maybe the example here would be like depression medication. Mm-hmm. When you're doing depression medication, like you have standards about like what you're allowed to give people. You're not allowed to just give people anything, right? And even when you're doing controlled trials, if you're giving somebody the treatment and it's like making them worse, like they have to be monitored like extensively, and there needs to be like all of these safeguards. And the reason that it makes sense to do that in that context is because presumably if you just let somebody continue without the drug, you will just have them be staying the course. Like obviously there's nuance to that, like, and at what point you're not just staying the course, but indeed you are like letting them progress to something worse. But like with something like with a lot of psychological conditions, it is just staying the course. It's not it's not that like by letting them continue on as they have been going that they are going to like be at a substantial risk. So like I guess the way I would think of it is like if you're on a highway, there are a lot of and there are just like a lot of exits off of that highway. Yeah. Like you can let them continue down that highway, and like eventually they might run out of exits. But presumably, as you continue, there will still be another exit for them to get off at later. I don't think that holds with trans healthcare, because, or at least with early trans healthcare, because when you get to puberty, it's not a highway that you can just let them keep going down. It's a fork in the road. Yeah. You have to either put them through one puberty or the other. And I think that in that case, you should go with what they say that they want. and that seems to be what gives the best results.
Yeah, like that. So that's usually what I would say is as well is like, yeah, you're either putting them down a course of blockers and hormones, or you're putting them down a path of having a puberty that makes them want to kill themselves. Right? I tend not to invoke the kill, but yeah, like that's the idea. But then I guess I think the only way that it's, at least the research I've seen suggests that like, if you're going to do that, it needs to be after like a very nuanced like period of like challenging questions and like psychological evaluation and all that to make sure they're making the right decision. Because I guess like, you know, like, which is probably why I think even kids who are identified as trans are very unlikely to get puberty blockers. They tend to give them out quite sparingly because I guess doctors aren't always as confident with different kids. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess my question would be like, do you think that same standard should be applied to like gynecomastia surgery? So I should have the statistics here. So, just a second. All right, so this is for the United States. I'm going to send it to you, and it's on page.
This is for male breasts, male breast reduction.
This is for male breast reduction. This is on page 15 on the bottom, and it says, and if you're looking at the PDF, it's page 17. And so if you go 17 and under, you can see that there were 2,000 or so male breast reductions for 17 and unders in 2018. And I'm pretty sure that this is higher than the number of double mastectomies for trans men.
Yeah, I think, okay, the reason I would say that I maybe put the threshold a bit lower for this one would be, one, I can't imagine, because of how society is, that many men are going to be missing their man boobs. Like, I think the regret rate for trans people is very low, right? Like 1 or 2%, but I'd imagine for this it's even lower. But also, are the side effects or long-term effects of these surgeries, like, are they like what the fuck am I saying? Are they about as present as the side effects of or long-lasting effects of blockers? Like,
I mean, in terms of bone density, probably not. But because I can't imagine that the surgery has like bone density issues.
Yeah, so I think they're just taking out fat, aren't they? Is that what it is? Or?
I mean, no, because I would think that, wouldn't they also have to remove muscle tissue? I actually don't know the answer to that. Because I've not like gotten into the nitty gritty of of these surgeries, but I know that like this is pretty clearly gender affirming surgery, and it's irreversible gender affirming surgery. Like it's far less reversible than puberty blockers, even if you think that like the even if it's like more likely to be the case that the effects of puberty blockers are negative, like this one is still far less reversible than puberty blockers. And
yeah, but then I guess the reversibility, because yeah, as far as I know, it's like breast tissue, which would be, I think that is fat. So yeah, it's like, to me, like I guess this is where maybe the clash might come, but to me, like a man who is born with like a man who's growing breasts larger than the average man, and it's like that's just like a very observable thing that seems to be like there's no negative effect of taking it down. Whereas I think the fear with like being too liberal when it comes to blockers and hormones is you might trans a kid who turn out to not need it, and then that might cause the issues with like, I think it's not just bone density, but I think there are also like I think like your height can change. I think your genital development can get a bit fucked. I think yeah, so yeah, I think that's why it probably makes sense to be a bit more cautious with one than the other.
I understand that point.
Also, sorry. Also, like hormones, I think isn't another thing with hormones like hot flushes, or your mood can change and your fatigue and all that. Like, yeah, it's quite a.
I mean, those things aren't. I was under the impression that those kinds of things were. I was under the impression that those were like when you were in the process, as opposed to like after the. How do I explain this? I mean, yeah, that tracks, but I don't know how if that gets to be classed as like a side effect, because you know normal people also get hot flushes and mood swings just from their general hormones. So like I would need to see it as like first of all at an elevated level, and also that these things are that these things persist after you stop HRT and stuff like that. And maybe they do. I don't know, but like I haven't. That's not something I'm familiar with.
Yeah, no, like I'm still pro blockers, but yeah, I think it's I mean, this is just from the NHS website, but yeah, side effects may also include hot flushes, fatigue, and mood alterations, and then like yeah, bone density, height, and all that. So yeah, no, I can, and also just because you know when a guy's got like, you know when a guy's got like too much fat tissue on his chest, but I guess it's harder to tell if a kid's got.
What do you
like,
mean by too much?
I know you think the too much to you is like subjective, right? Because like
yes.
yeah, it's also like and that's to me that's like the impasse, because I guess it's not really like, as far as like it's not really adding anything, and socially it might cause you problems. So you don't need it. Like it's not, but I guess with like the medical procedure of like transition and blockers and hormones, it's just maybe a bit more complex than the fat removal.
I mean, maybe it's
but also because
complex.
yeah, like dysphoria is also probably a lot. I don't know if men who have like that breast tissue thing have dysphoria, right? Like I think it's like, so yeah, I don't know.
Wouldn't that make my point though?
Yeah, it
like,
would. Yeah.
If they don't have dysphoria, but they're still allowed to get these kinds of surgeries just because, like they're it's just like normal everyday distress. Like I feel like that more supports the idea that we're being too restrictive with trans healthcare, as opposed to the idea that we're being or that it's like fine as is, we're not restrictive enough.
But that's why I don't know, because like I think for regret rates for trans people, I've seen some research saying 1 or 2%. I've seen others saying 8%. I don't know.
1 or 2. I think 1 or 2. That first. So that's a little complicated, just because it depends on what we mean by like what we mean by gender affirming surgery. Like I'm under the impression that the 1 to 2% regret rate is about people who like get surgery. I can't say that I remember off the top of my head, but that's what I remember being the case. So like it might be the case that the reason you see differences in regret rate is because you're seeing differences in what that study classified as gender affirming surgery. Like they might have just been talking about bottom surgery, or they might have included bottom surgery and top surgery and hormones and like all these other things, right? And presumably the regret rate for the most extreme surgeries is going to be the lowest, because only only the most dedicated people are going to be the ones who go for that. So you're not selecting for you don't have like a representative sample of the population.
Yeah, but that's what I think. And again, I'm always skeptical about these studies because they're all like 30, 40 participants. I think there's one from the UK that was saying, what was the number?
Also, to be clear, 8% is still really low.
Yeah, it is, but I'm just wondering how low it is compared to regret rates for men getting fat taken out of their breasts, right?
Oh,
I'd imagine the regret rate for that is probably nothing, just because of the world we live in.
I have no idea, though. That's the thing. Like nobody bothers to study it, and I think that's that makes part of my point, is that like nobody bats an eye when cis people, even very young minors, get gender affirming surgery. Nobody cares. They don't bother to study it. They don't bother to look at it. It's just something that you're allowed to do without any real oversight. Like the statistics I gave you are from the Aesthetic Society. This is like plastic surgery. It's not even considered like you don't need like a prescription for anything for it. At least not to my knowledge.
So I'm just glancing this study now. I think when it comes to a study from a UK primary care practice found that 12.2% of those who had started hormonal treatments either detransitioned or documented regret, while 20% stopped the treatments for a wider range of reasons. What the fuck is that from? That's
Sorry, can you send me the study you're talking about so I can look at the actual wording? You said 12% either expressed regrets or stopped.
Yeah, detransitioned or documented regret. That's I don't think I've seen it that high before, but yeah.
I mean that's like a so the reason I imagine that this is the highest is because it's just looking at hormones, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's like that's at the lower end of extremity. So you might get people who try it and then don't like it, right? But let me find this. Who is? Hold on, I recognize the study author. I want to make sure that like.
I have a feeling this is to do with Tavistock, perhaps. Would that? Because that was the same numbers I heard from that.
Yeah, so like just as a thing, Levine, like the head author of this study is somebody who he's more like on the skeptical side for gender transitioning.
Mm-hmm.
So like he doesn't believe, like he doesn't go all the way with like in the same way that somebody like what's her face does, like, and say that it's like just all a social contagion. But I'm just letting you know that this person does have a they do have a bias to towards like expressing skepticism, and even with that they found like a 12% regret rate, right? So 12. That said, like just to lend a little credence to the other side, you always have to be very, very careful because like and like read the full studies, because just like by the nature of trans healthcare, you cannot get what are called high quality studies in the sense that you can't do like randomized you can't do random control trials, really. You can't always get control groups, even. Like it's difficult anyway.
Yeah, but that's the thing, like the reason I'm maybe differentiating it from the breast reduction for men is like just because, like, as far as I know, I haven't heard any complaints about that from like men who had that happen. Actually, I know one guy who actually did have that. He had his chest reduced when he was a kid. But like if it does, like maybe, or it's being pushed under the rug, that would be like quite interesting, because then yeah, I would wonder why they do it so freely compared to trans stuff.
Why isn't? Am I like glancing over it? Is there? Where's the citation to?
I don't know.
The UK primary care practice. It just says it. There's no citation at the end. Like there's the citation for the previous thing, but then it says another study. So I would think that they're talking about a different study.
Yeah.
Maybe they're
I'd be quite surprised, because like the highest I've seen is 8% from an American, but I don't know. This British one's new to me.
Well, the reason I want to read it is because it's deceptive. This wording feels deceptive, right? So it says another study from a UK primary practice found that 12.2% of those who started hormonal treatments either detransitioned or documented regret.
Yeah, and documented regret can be anything, right? It can be really loose.
Yeah, right? Like you could say like, oh, I regret not freezing my eggs before because, you know, I wanted to have kids, right? But overall, I had a positive experience, right? Like this is really, I would say weaselly. And also just because like you're lumping in like stopping with like expressing regret. But like, I mean, it even says like you can stop for other reasons, right? So let me try to find the actual original study here. Is it maybe Hall, Mitchell, and Savage? Let me find this. I'm thinking maybe it's the previous citation and they just like fucked it up. Please.
Actually, I think I know where they got it from. Hang on.
Oh. Sadly, Sci-Hub doesn't have the study.
Early intervention study. That 20% number makes me think it's Tavistock, but I don't know anything about. There's a lot of controversy around them, so I don't know if I'm.
I don't know enough about Tavistock to talk about it.
Like I know in Sweden, like again, there is the political thing because in Sweden they used a study of like 30 people and then they used it to change their laws. You know, like I'm in the position right now that there should just be more research because it seems to be like there might be some fluctuation in regret rates like between the 1% and 8%, but like that's kind of where I am now. But like the only way you get to do more research is by giving blockers to kids. So
yeah, exactly. All right. Yeah, I mean that's all I really wanted to talk about. Do you have anything else you want to ask me about before I head out of here?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay, cool. Also, do you care if I so choose? Do you care if I upload this as something to my own channel?
No, you can take it. It's fine.
Okay.
All right.
That's not you're allowed to upload it as well. I notoriously forget to upload shit. But
that's fine.
It was good to talk to you again. Since last time we were debating, so
yeah.
Anyway,
a bit more chill this time. All right, you take care. All right.
Oh wait, actually, one more thing. Has anybody like been expressing like disdain in the chat? Like have they been criticizing anything I've said so that I can like respond to it, or has it mostly just been like?
I think some people, and I don't really know where I am on this. Like, I guess I haven't really thought that much about it. I think some people don't like the idea of calling it like gender affirming care, like lumping the trans thing in with like something like a cosmetic thing, like men with their like too much breast tissue. I think people don't like lumping those in as. I think when Lance did it with the fucking gender affirming care. What was it the surf said? Oh God, he said that Steven Crowder getting his chest puffed out.
Yeah, it was the So like I think that I understand that concern. I think that with male breast reduction surgery, it's pretty unambiguously about gender, right? Like it's not, and specifically about social expectations around your gender identity. Like I would be hard pressed to find another explanation that fits better, because like with chest cavity, like sure there might be like gender reasons, but like there are other like much different reasons that you could want your chest not to be caved in, especially because like I believe in like the most severe cases it can lead to heart problems, right? So like and then it basically what I would say is that it's like a spectrum, right? So there's stuff that has like gendered elements to it but is not really best characterized as gender affirming care. Then there's stuff that's like kind of in the middle, like hair implants, where there's like a substantial gender component to it, but there's also just like other social expectation components to it. And then I think there's things that you could only really say are gender affirming. And I think that male breast reduction is one of those things. Like unless it's like cancerous, but I don't think that I'm not aware of it consistently being cancerous or developing into cancer. So it seems to me just like it's gender affirming only. That's how I would respond to the people who were complaining about that in chat. Also, I guess AltFax says that it can be uncomfortable, but like, you know, so can I understand that. Like, it depends on how large it is, though, right? Like if like you can have back pain from having big boobs too. And a lot of women get breast reduction surgeries specifically for that reason. And it tends to be the case that I don't think that most gynecomastia is that large, but who knows? Maybe I'm misinformed. Anyway, I will now take my leave. Thank you for bringing me on. It was fun to talk. Yeah.
Take care. Take care. Bye-bye.